world of politics, it is said that there are no two people who truly have all the same values. Although there might be a limited amount of parties or political systems around the world, everyone is free to make up their own systems or parties with one's own belief. JFK once said that a man may die, nations may rise and fall, but an idea lives on. Even though some of the thinkers behind these ideologies have died, their beliefs shall live on forever. On the internet, many groups of people have gathered to discuss not only normal politics, but many different ideas and beliefs around the world. On YouTube, Reddit, and beyond, some of these places of people of interest could be JREC, the Political Compass Quiz, or even some of the many alt history groups of the internet. To generally explain what this idea is going to focus on r/Iceberg charts, I stumbled upon an ideology chart, which looked rather interesting. I don't think I have to explain what an iceberg chart is, but generally it's a chart which shows knowledge about a certain topic from most known to the deepest part of the rabbit hole. If I hadn't explained before, an ideology is a political belief in how the world/country should work, how people should live their lives, how the state is going to work, and how we should look at the world. So this video is not only going to be interesting, it is also going to be educational, both for me and for you. Well, without further ado, let's dig down. Well, this is a short start. Apoliticalism, as the name would rather heavily hint at, is a lack of involvement in political affairs. People who call themselves apolitical rather not talk about politics because they don't have a political view or doesn't want one. Generally, this isn't really an ideology, but rather a lack of one. But again, this might be one of, if not the most followed ideology in the world. And as one who follows politics rather closely, I can see why. Capitalism, which can be described in many ways, is an economic system where the private individual, or businesses, have the right to own their own capital goods, hence the word capitalism. Capital goods can be described as the result or exchange of money of what one produces, which can be basically anything under the sun, from new cars to painted rocks. Basically, man has a right to make money through the market. Conservatism is a political and social system which heavily favors traditions, social institutions, and values. Conservatism is used as a form of break in the changing world. Conservatives aren't really afraid of change, but would rather keep some of the things that make their people who they are, like religion and again tradition. These people can be seen on the right wing of the political spectrum, both economically and through most other affairs like culture. Liberalism is a political philosophy based on liberty, consent of the governed, and equality before the law. Liberalism says that all men are free to do whatever they want. They generally want a weaker government with less tax and less surveillance of the people, and should only focus on the most basic things like the military and healthcare. A liberal would say that a man should earn his own future instead of getting handed to him by the government, because this would infringe on other people's freedom. Generally, these people really like to be free, especially economically. Centrism, just as capitalism, has many shades to it. Mostly, centrists are in the middle of the political spectrum and doesn't really have any extreme beliefs to it. These people generally want the status quo, or as things are right now, to continue. Some people have a habit of mixing centrism and apoliticalism together, even though they aren't the same thing. Apolitical people doesn't want to be a part of politics, while centrists do want to be a part of politics, but doesn't step out the boundaries of what one would consider normal. Anarchy, which you have surely seen sprayed on the walls around town, is the belief that all types of hierarchy are flawed and dangerous. They, therefore, call for an absolute removal of the state as a whole, and let the people govern themselves, either through small communes or a direct democracy of some kind. Anarchy is also an ideology which can be flexible. Since the only main goal is to destroy the state, you can really put any kind of ism in front and it will be a political movement of some kind. Anarchists also have flags that represent which kind of anarchy they associate themselves with. Another broad one, huh? Generally, socialism is a political theory which wants a social or a state-controlled production in the hope of seizing the means of production. Socialism can be described as the opposite of liberalism, where instead of everyone having the freedom to do whatever they want, economically, socialists want the state to control the factories and govern the country, in the hope of creating equality amongst the people of the state. This also comes in many shapes and sizes, from the less extreme social democracy all the way to the hardline communists. Neocons generally want to return to a modified form of traditional viewpoints, in particular a political ideology characterized by an emphasis on free market capitalism and interventionist foreign policy. Generally, this is just conservatism, but they want to modify the traditions to fit more into the modern era rather than with a more modern touch or a more inclusive version. This is, therefore, also a more modern ideology seen in most Western countries today. Progressivism can be generally defined as people who want to put progress of things like science, technology, economic development, and social standard at the forefront and therefore focus its resources on these areas. In more modern times, this term is used a lot in the more left-wing spectrum, with people who want more immigration, more feminism, more freedom, and tolerance of different sexualities, or just more tolerance of other people generally. Oh boy, it's gonna be a messy one, isn't it? Nationalism is such a widely used term that it can either be a great thing or a terrible thing, depending on who you ask. There's therefore also many new and different terms that are associated with nationalism, all from patriotism to fascism to just liking one's own country. I'm gonna use Google to define this one so I don't annoy anyone too much. Nationalism is an idea and movement that promotes the interests of a particular nation, as in groups of people, especially with an aim of gaining and maintaining the nation's sovereignty, self-governance over its homeland. This can also range over many different things, like nationalism over one's continent, over a province, or even a city. Libertarianism, not to be confused with liberalism, is an ideology which heavily focuses on the individual and the maximization of economic freedom. They are generally very skeptical of the government and want to lay off taxes and other things that might hinder one's economic freedom. These people are also generally a fan of the whole "don't tread on me" thing, which also pretty much sums up the whole ideology. Get your hammer and sickle, worker. I think the Soviets are calling for you. Marxism-Leninism can generally be described as the most basic version of communism, which takes ideas from both Karl Marx, the founder of the whole socialist movement, and Vladimir Lenin, the forehead of the Russian Revolution and the founder of the Soviet Union. Generally, this ideology wants the state to own the means of production and distribute equality among the citizens of the nation. This ideology also prefers a one-party system, where only one body of government gets to push the buttons of the country. Communists use a 5-year plan or a heavy industry to maximize production around one's nation. A well-known fact about Marxism and Leninism is that every time it's been tried, it has failed. Yeah, sorry Tanky, but it just didn't work. Some people say that we should try again, whilst other people generally don't want to risk millions of people's lives and livelihoods just to try a political experiment. A monarchy is a system where the official head of state is a monarch of any kind. Generally, the monarchy is more than just a political symbol, but also a religious one. In Europe, the kings and queens are chosen by God, and in Japan, the emperor is a descendant of the sun god. Monarchies also have different shades, but mostly in how much authority the monarch has. It can range from absolutism, where the king has final say in all matters of life. He is chosen by God, so if you disagree with him, you disagree with God. On the other hand, you have a more constitutional monarchy, which is more of a modern-day monarchy, which can be seen in Japan, the UK, and Denmark. Monarchies used to be the standard political choice in almost all countries around the world, but after the French Revolution, this began to change for the kingdom of the world. Well, now that we are through the more normal ideologies, let's dig deeper down into more rare ideologies. Stalinism, as the name predicts, is a form of communism that has been shaped by the Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin, which therefore was used in countries that have been heavily influenced by Stalin. Stalinism is different from normal communism in a few ways. First, it called for a prolonging of totalitarianism, or rather a dictatorship. Stalin thought that slowly turning into a democracy would only weaken true communism. Therefore, strict rule by the communists would prevent the rise of bourgeoisie. He also had the idea of communism in one state, where the state would prioritize keeping communism in one country instead of trying too hard to spread the revolution. He also did things like purging his ranks and starting famines from the Soviet Union, which all are part of Stalinism in one way or another. Trotskyism is another shade of communism. Actually, around the time of Lenin's death, there was a power struggle between the two ideologies of Stalinism and Trotskyism. Stalin won, of course, and Trotsky ended up with a pickaxe in his back in New Mexico. Trotskyism differs from Stalinism in many ways. First, Trotsky was against the theory of communism in one state and would rather have a permanent revolution, where he would advocate the work of the world to unite and lay off the change, even if he had to fund these revolutions with Russian money. He also heavily favored a democratic system, which would be implemented sooner rather than later. In modern times, Trotskyism and the whole communism thing isn't really that popular, but they can still be seen from place to place. Anarcho-capitalists, also known as ANCAPs, believe in a totally free government state where everything is ruled by a corporate rule. This ideology is an ultra-capitalist and ultra-libertarian ideology where people have the right to buy anything they want since everything can now be bought. Basically, anarcho-capitalists see capitalism and the free market as the basis of a free and functioning society. Yeah, everything from police to medication to the soup you buy in the supermarket is owned by a corporate being. And yeah, this also means that people and armies can be bought too if people think that's okay. This ideology is also the complete opposite of communism. Bonapartism is a small niche little ideology that can be found in France. Bonapartism is an ideology made by Napoleon Bonaparte, which advocates for a monarchy-style government with strong ties to the military. Yeah, Napoleon made an ideology about himself. What a cool dude. This ideology has been used 2 times in France, on Napoleon I and Napoleon III. This ideology is basically Napoleon's version of a monarchy, with philosophy from the French Revolution and a social order which should remind people of the old Roman Empire. This has been used before in a different country other than France, in a former French colony in Africa, where a monarchist claimed a throne of some kind. It's a weird little story of some guy who claims to have some French royalty in him, I think. National Bolshevism, or Nationals, is a weird ideology which mixes both National Socialism together with Bolshevism, which is a form of communism. This ideology basically has the economic system of the Soviet Union and a state shaped like Nazi Germany. It's an ideology which has seen a fair amount of popularity actually, all the way from the end of the First World War to today, where people, especially in Russia, is advocating for the system to be set in place. Their symbol is also a weird one with a hammer and sickle on the Germans' party flag. What? Now, if you remember from before, nationalism is belief that one state is very important, while anarchism is for removing the state entirely, because it's flawed and easily corruptible. Huh. National anarchism, more or less, talks about how the state should be removed, while things like tradition, social values, and ethnicity should be highly enforced. They also call for racial separation, rather through segregation, strict immigration, or even the removal of unwanted people, even through a holocaust if that's needed. They want anarchism, but also want to remove the social values of regular anarchism. This whole ideology is a weird fascist oxymoron where people want to cherish the state but still want to remove it. It probably doesn't surprise you that this has never really been tried before in reality. Anarcho-communism, as you would have guessed by now, is an ideology which wants to remove the state and enforce an extreme socialist economy. The only difference is that instead of a state-owned economy, since that would be impossible, it is a collectivist economy. You've already heard about anarchism and communism, and this is basically just the two smelted together. Anarcho-communism has never really been tried before, and has only been briefly seen on the Republican side of the Spanish Civil War under the SNTFAI thing. Now this is a new one. Anarcho-primitivism is a rare one-of-a-kind anarcho-ideology. Anarcho-primitivism calls not only for the removal of the state, but also the removal of civilization as a whole. The philosophy behind primitivism is that the shift from hunter-gatherers to agricultural subsistence during the Neolithic Revolution gave rise to social alienation and social stratification. They also, of course, call for deindustrialization, a removal of all kinds of tax, and money for that sake, abolition of labor, and a total return to monkey. Yeah, no work, no taxes, no extreme climate change, but again, there's no medicine, no housing, no stores to buy food, no isolation and leaps in science, just you, your tribe, and some spears. Pinochetism is an extreme right-wing ideology made by the Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet, who was in power from 1973 to 1990. This ideology is a nationalist, culturally and economically right-wing ideology with an authoritarian nature with the support of the military. This isn't just a normal authoritarian right-wing ideology. This ideology also opposes any kind of left-wing ideology like communism, socialism, or social democracy. What is special about Pinochet and his ideology is that expected commies got a free helicopter ride up into the sky, where afterwards they were dropped out, just to make sure that not only did they die, but people too realized that the left would be met with death. This is also where their flag came from. This ideology has only been seen in Chile, although there have been many anti-left ideologies out there. Transhumanism is a philosophical movement that advocates for the transformation of the human condition by developing and making widely available sophisticated technologies able to greatly modify or enhance human intellect and psychology. Basically, they want to turn humanity into robots, since humans are flawed and machines aren't, apparently. They want to eliminate things like aging, sickness, and greatly increase humanity's brains and bodies. This idea has also been called the world's most dangerous idea by Francis Fukuyama. This isn't really so much of a political view than it's a philosophical view, because there is no kind of economy or state-driven thing, it's just humans should be robots. And of course, this idea has never really been tried before. Pol Potism is an ideology made by the communist dictator of Cambodia, Pol Pot. Pol Potism can be described as a far-left, ultra-nationalist, and most bizarre, a genocidal ideology. Yeah, this ideology wants a lot of murder. Pol Pot wants to remove all anti-revolutionaries from Cambodia, since he feared they would plot against him and the Khmer Rouge regime. The list of anti-revolutionaries are quite big, from everything from Buddhist to intellectual to Vietnamese spies, and most bizarrely, people with glasses. Pol Potism was only really seen in Cambodia, but the country is still scarred from the time of Pol Pot. In total, the Cambodian genocide, as it's known, killed from around 1.5 to 2 million people. Nazism, or National Socialism, is a brand of the fascist ideology which can be known from, well, you know where it came from. Nazism and fascism isn't actually the same thing, and there are quite a few things that keep them apart. While there are racial elements in both, generally fascism wanted the weak to be ruled by the strong, while Nazism called for a biological stand. They claim that a Aryan race exists and should therefore be the master race of the world. They claim that it's Nordic and Germanic people that the Aryans, even though the word originated in Iran. Also difference, in fascism, the state is worshipped by the people, while in Nazism, the party is above the state. Also economically, fascism is a kind of socialist system with a capitalist taste, while Nazism was a bit more on the capitalist side, since they like that whole Darwinism thing and the survival of the fittest. Even though Nazism was mainly practiced in Germany, there was also an off-branch in Croatia called the Ustasha, which reminds a lot of the Nazis in Germany. Anarcho-nihilism, or Anhi, is an individualist anarchist ideology who believes that life is without objective purpose, and as such, society and the state, morals, have no grounding in reality. This is basically the depressed kid's ideology. Nihilists in itself are people who say that all value are baseless and that nothing can be known or communicated. So when they put anarcho in front of it, they basically want to destroy all kinds of religion and state, and then sit on a rock and sigh a lot. This ideology has never been seen in the real world before, other than the depressed kids, which you're probably going to talk to. I mean, come on, why do you think they're depressed all the time? Queer anarchism is anarchy, but gay. Yeah, that's it. Queer anarchists wants not only to abolish the state, but also all kinds of homophobia, lesbophobia, transphobia, and all that kind of stuff. These people think that restricting people of having whatever sexuality they want is a fringe on their rights and therefore a statist, hierarchy thought, which they want to destroy. Also, it's not as modern as you would think, with all this modern feminism thing. No, a guy back in the 20s and 30s named Adolf went around Berlin and Germany and talked about his people suffering and how it should end it, and no, it's not that Adolf, it's Adolf Brand. More anarchy, huh? Illegalism is a tendency of anarchism that developed primarily in France, Italy, Belgium, and Switzerland during the 90s as an outgrowing of individualist anarchy. Illegalists embrace crime either openly or secretly as a lifestyle. Illegalism does not specify the type of crime, though, although it's associated with theft or shoplifting of some kind. Basically, it's a criminal's dream. All crime is legal and the world becomes a world of kill or be killed. Or steal or be stolen. It sounds cool, almost like a movie, but again, people getting stabbed is a little high on my list. And again, no, open crime is not real. It has never been tried before, and it's never going to. Libertarian socialism is a form of stateless socialism. In other words, anarchy. Basically, people are free of the state, but also have to share the goods among each other. This ideology is also extremely anti-authoritarian and is even anti-Leninist and anti-Stalinist. It's basically anarcho-communism, but because it's a funny name with libertarian socialism, which I like the opposite thing, it's very high on the list, I guess. Jihadism is a 21st century radical political and religious theory which advocates for a militant, Muslim, death to the West kind of feel. They mostly want to take down the Western system and spread Islam across the world. The term jihadist or jihadism first appeared in Western journalists and media in the aftermath of September 11th. This is also the start of the real jihadism as we know it. It can also be seen around Europe with the many terror attacks. And yes, this has been tried and is still being tried around the world today, mainly in Islamic terror groups in the Middle East, Afghanistan, but it's also practiced by a few in Europe. This is kind of a secret one. A simple Google search can't give you anything useful, but the comments that the Iceberg does. User/Josh describes it as if Bhutan became hyper-capitalist, so I guess a capitalist system where Buddhism is a core philosophy. Radical centrism arose in the late 20th century in the Western nations. At first it was not that much defined, but the late 21st century, a number of political science texts gave it a more developed cast. The radical in the name refers to a willingness on the part of the most radical centrists to call for a fundamental reform of institutions, and the centrist was like the first thing we covered on this list. So basically, people who think that politics shouldn't be emotional, but rather something that should work well, like a well-oiled machine, think that a sense of the real world would make things go around way easier. This ideology isn't really that far-fetched, like some of the others in this list, but the weirdness might be in the core facts about this ideology. It is a radicalization of the middle, a fanaticism about realism and central solutions, something that usually doesn't really fit together. Usually, the more away from the middle you go, the more radical it becomes. But when people in the middle are radical, it becomes kinda weird. One radical centrist text defined the radical centrism as an idealism without delusion, a phrase originally from John F. Kennedy. Kahanism is an extreme Jewish ideology based on the views of Rabbi Meir Kahane, founder of the Jewish Defense League and the Kach Party in Israel. Kahane maintained the view that the majority of Arabs living in Israel are enemies of the Jews and Israel itself. He also believed in a Jewish theocratic state where non-Jews have no voting rights. The Kach Party has been banned in Israel and the Israeli government and the US Department, which has labeled it a foreign terrorist organization. Probably because of those terror bombings, but who knows. In a way, Kahanism can be described as an ultra-nationalist Jewism, where they think that all of Israel's territory should be kept and not be given to foreign powers like Egypt and Syria for peace deals. They also call for racial segregation between Arabs and Jews, and even call for non-voting areas in Israel. It's basically like a Jim Crow, Dixie kind of system, but with Jewish tendencies. This has been tried before, but it is illegal now because the Kach Party, of course, is banned in Israel. This is another meme ideology found by JRick in the video Coming Out as an Anarcho-Nazism. The ideology can be described as an ideology which wants no state, since anarchy, a far-left economy, since Bolshevism, and a far-right cultural outlook, because nationalism. It's basically a clusterfuck of ideas which wants a state-controlled economy, while also being proud of one's people and beliefs, but still doesn't want a state to exist. Some people have joked this is a real joker's true ideology, but I don't think so. It's just another one of JRick's small little creations. Eco-fascism is a theoretical political model in which an authoritarian government would require individuals to sacrifice their own interests and beliefs to the organic whole of the future, and also nature, of course. I guess you could say that instead of people having to sacrifice their own freedom to the state, it's the environment. This is a kind of dystopian ideology where the government uses police and military power to secure the well-being of the planet, where something as small as smoking a cigarette could get you shot. I know smoking kills, but this is ridiculous. This has never been tried before, well, yet at least. I think Greta Thunberg has something up her sleeve. Egoism, in its core belief, is actually a philosophy, which says that man should focus on what one really wants to do in life. A belief that puts emphasis on actions according to one's will, rather than one's self-interest, and furthermore, persists that this is a truer sense of egoism. These philosophers were also against many kinds of authority. Of course, since it's political, this has something to do with the weird ideology. Now, which ideology could talk about individual freedom at the end of unfair authority and an assassination of its anarchy? It's fucking anarchy. Basically, This idea of egoism has influenced many anarchists and has even created its own taste of anarchy, where people should only focus on themselves. This has weirdly also influenced the other part of the spectrum and has even been seen in some kind of fascism. According to Leszek Kolakowski, fascism was above all an attempt to dissolve the social ties created by history and replace them with artificial bonds among individuals who were expected to render explicit obedience to the state on grounds of absolute egoism. Fascist education combined the tenets of asocial egoism and unquestioning conformism, the latter being the means by which the individual secured his own niche in the system. So, in a way, egoism has been a driving factor back in the days of Mussolini's rise. So, this is an interesting ideology, not for what it is, but for where it has been. Anarcho-monarchism is kind of a joke in the whole political community of the internet. Anarcho-monarchism is an ideology presented as a form of anarchism, but with a monarch. No one really believes in it or tries it, so it's more of a thought experiment, which then became a meme. It's also easy to dismiss as complete idiocy, since monarchs and anarchism are mutually exclusive. Anarcho-monarchism is also impossible, since anarchism is against the state, whilst kings and queens are states. If anarcho-monarchism was to work, it would mean that the king, or the state, would have to rule the people, trying its best to stop people from forming a state. When the monarch dies, one can't just put the offspring into power, since that would mean that the monarch would be a state figure. No, instead a giant civil war breaks out and the survivors have become the new king. Safe to say, this is and will stay a thought experiment, since it doesn't make any sense on any plane of existence. Accelerationism in political and social theory is the idea that capitalism and its historical associated processes should be accelerated instead of overcome in order to generate radical social change. Accelerationism may also refer to the support of the intensification of capitalism in the belief that it will hasten its self-destructive tendencies and ultimately lead to its collapse. In a weird way, these people want capitalism to go overboard until it collapses, where the people make a new, better state, whether it be left-wing, communism, or right-wing ethno-states. This, again, hasn't been tried before, because normal people just try to make change to politics instead of trying to make a system go overboard, which will collapse the economy, kill people, ruin homes, and just go to politics. God damn it! Why? Poseidism is a tendency within Trotskyism that follows the belief of J. Poseidas. Poseidists are organized in a number of national political parties and internationally as the Poseidist Fourth International. Poseidists were once notorious on the far left for their cultist devotion to their leader and their bizarrely positive views on nuclear war. Basically, it's an ideology which started with Marx, then Lenin, then Trotsky, then Poseidas, and now in a weird bubble where people use it as a joke. The core thing that differs this ideology from normal communism is that they are very far right culturally and they have a rather soft spot for nuclear war. They see a devastating nuclear war as a final end to the workers' struggle, where killing the West with nukes would be the solution. These guys are therefore also a branch of NASBOLs, or National Bolshevism, so again, laughingstock. Apparently they're kind of popular on 4chan, but I wouldn't know, because I'm not a loner. Esoteric Nazism, or esoteric Hitlerism, or fascism is any of a number of mystical interpretations and adaptations of Nazism after the Second World War. This is more of a new religious movement of white nationalism and neo-Nazism with their own esoteric interpretations of the Third Reich. This is a kind of pagan ultra-nationalism where there is talk about where the ancient Aryan race came from. There is talk about a religious and racial pure race, this place, which can be found. Some would say that this race came from the ancient Hyperborea, a myth in ancient Greece about a people of the north who were the perfect specimens, and a place of beauty where the sun never sets. Although it has never been found before, there is talk that it's hidden around Iceland or Greenland. This has, again, never really been tried before, but it has had a lot of followers, like about half the Nazi SS and a few followers in India. Ingsoc, short for English Socialism, is a fictional party in the book 1984, written in 1949 by Arthur George Orwell. The book is a critique against totalitarian regimes like the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany, and Ingsoc is supposed to be an example of what could happen if a state got too much power. The book is placed in a dystopian future in London, or Airstrip 1, in the country of Oceania, where Ingsoc is the only party. There are three main principles of Ingsoc: Newspeak, the party's official language, and one which they use to effectively communicate the party's messages; Doublethink, the ability to hold onto two opposite ideas in one's mind at the same time; and Immutability of the past, not holding on to any particular beliefs or events in the past, or before the party came into power. There are three types of citizens in Oceania: the Prowls, which are the lower people of the population, or just those who are controlled. There's the Outer Party, which are, well, I guess, politicians that aren't that important. The Inner Party, which is the most important politicians, and then there's Big Brother, which is the leader. I think that's also part of both the Outer and Inner Party are the four ministries. The Ministry of Peace serves as the wartime ministry of Oceania, and is in charge of the armed forces, but mostly the navy and army. There's the Ministry of Plenty, which controls Oceania's command economy. It oversees the rationing, food, supplies, and goods of the country. There's the Ministry of Truth, which is the propaganda ministry. This ministry tells the people what is real and what isn't, and it can basically say that anything has happened or has never happened before. And then there's the Ministry of Love, which enforces loyalty to Big Brother through fear. There are also three slogans which fit to the party and the ministries: War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength, and Big Brother is watching you. This has again never been tried before, but Orwell tells us that this is what could happen if a government got too much power. Hive mind collectivism is an ideology which has unitary, eosocial, and collective tendencies. Like a beehive, completely forgetting the idea of preserving culture, private wealth, and individual liberty, the hive has ascended from the tucks on poles of society and has achieved total harmony through assimilation. The term hive mind refers to the thought process that can be seen in some animals like ants and bees. These animals have a group mentality where one's own state of being is irrelevant, but the group is the important part. The entire colony has the same mindset. Collectivism is a value that is characterized by emphasis on sharing among individuals and prioritization of the group over the self. So together, it's an ideology which wants people to share everything down to the single thought. It's a theory that says that a perfect society could be created if everyone was the same person, whether they want to or not. This is a form of ultra-communism where it's so extreme that it's even outside the political compass, meaning that it's too extreme for extremists. This has not been tried before, mostly because it's going to be impossible for everyone to share the same minds, although it is seen in bees and ants in some way. Circulus was a socio-economic doctrine devised by the 19th century French utopian socialist Pierre Leroux. He proposed that human excrement, or shit, should be collected by the state in a form of tax and used as fertilizer, thereby increasing agricultural production. Yes, the government is gonna steal your poop. So Leroux wanted to establish this all the way back in 1834 to try to fix the failures of modern fertilization, but it was not implemented. He eventually fled to Jersey because of political instability in France, but kept on to his theory and tried to implement it to the locals. That didn't happen either, and he only gained one follower through his time in Jersey. LaRue thought that collecting the people's shit through taxes would not only revolutionize the agricultural scene, but increase not only the amount, but the quality of the food made on the farms. Back in the 1800s, this only gained 2 followers, as different sources proclaim, but with modern problems today, as we see them, it has gained popularity, and some people want to implement it again. So the state wants to collect the shit, which is free and great, through taxes. This doesn't sound that bad actually. I don't see the utopian part in this. Well, finally finished. The Iceberg shot is done. Took a lot of time with the editing, the research, voiceover. That was a lot to find, right? I want to give a huge thanks to user/SektorPriza on Reddit for making the entire chart. I am surprised that more of them on here like fascism and Soviet monarchism or Burgundianism, but again, there's already a lot of them on here and we can't put every single one of them on there or else we'll be still making it to this day. Other than that, yeah, I think that was it. Yeah, pretty much. I will probably make more in the future, don't know when, don't know where, but it is gonna happen.